Good day, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Safari Mack Explores Australia. I'm Safari Mack, your guide and host, helping you make connections to the wild. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're still here in the Australian outback, but today we're coming to you from South Australia, where we're going to hang out with a very special animal, the emu, or otherwise known by the Latin name of Dromaeus novahollandae. I know that's a little bit of a tongue twister, even for me. Today we're going to take a look at a very special bird that as we know, doesn't fly, but is able to run around with all the other Australian wildlife. So get your bird watching binoculars ready. And before we begin, if you're new to my channel, hit that like and subscribe button. Check out my Facebook page for content on conservation. And if you have a question about animals, or if there's an animal that you want me to do in the future, you just got to send me an email, which you will always find the link to down in my description below. But if you're ready, I'm ready. Let's get started. As always, let's start off with its family and its evolution. Now, the emu is pretty unusual because it's a very special kind of bird. It's what we would call a ratite, which would include ostriches, the cassowary of New Guinea and northern Australia, the rhea bird of South America, and even the famous kiwi bird, which is, as we know, is capable of having a kid or laying an egg that would almost be 80% of its own body weight. Can you imagine passing something like that? They're what you call the flightless birds. But now, why is that? Well, as always, let's go back to the beginning. See, millions of years ago, there were birds that were evolving, but some birds evolved differently from others. One group of birds, the ratites, lost their ability for flight, and as a result, though, they didn't really need it so much because while they couldn't fly, they were of course able to run faster than anything else around. And so, as a result, and thanks to it's kind of hard to exactly figure out what or how these animals evolved, as there are many different theories. But one theory is that the ancient supercontinent of Gondwana, which was once made of South America, Africa, India, Madagascar, Antarctica, and of course Australia, once were all joined together. But of course, as time passed and the continents began to drift apart from each other, the birds kind of hitched on each other on their continents, went for a little ride, and over time would evolve into their own bloodlines and own animals that we know of today. So, as a result, different birds evolved from different parts, and the emu is thought to have originated in Australia roughly around 15 million years ago. Now, there's been a number of different famous flightless birds like the terror birds, even the famous elephant bird that once lived on the African island nation of Madagascar. Now let's go on to their habitat, their lifestyle, and their reproduction. So the emu is basically a bird that is designed for any kind of habitat, with most populations staying clear away from heavily human developed places. So they won't really go too close to humans, or they won't hang around in those kind of habitats, but they are well designed for other places. Now, in terms of socialness, they are considered what you would be like a solitary bird, but that's not to say that they won't group together every now and then to find food or to keep each other safe from predators. And even during migrations, when they go from one place to another, they'll kind of group up together and form these semi-flocks to go find food and water, or even to find mates. Now, in terms of habitat, these guys are able to find anywhere from savanna woodlands to the Serralifal hill forest regions, where there's plenty of vegetation and other creatures to eat. We'll get into that though a little bit later. So now comes a pretty interesting twist. So we probably know the story, boy meets girl, they do what they have to do, and they end up getting happily ever after, and they have kids. Here's what happens though. So during the southern hemisphere's summer months of December and January, a breeding pair will kind of hang out together for a while, and then by April and June, so right about now, nests are starting to be constructed. The female does the work of finding the place to build the nest, get the materials, and then she lays the eggs, but then she's gone. She leaves. She does not come back. Instead, in an ironic twist, it's the father that does all the work of raising the young. So, like I said, mom lays the eggs, but then she gives them to dad, and he's the one who incubates, and in time, hatches. And in time, by 2 years later, they'll be ready to strike out on their own, and the male will do the process of attracting a mate all over again. So, in terms of like raising kids and being grateful for your parent, I guess in this kind of case, it does make things a bit confusing on Mother's Day. So, I guess this is where I would like to say that if I wanted to think of an Australian dad superstar, it would have to be the emu. Now let's move on to their diet and their foraging style. So obviously, emus need to eat vegetation. They eat different kinds of grass and different kinds of plants that make up the Australian outback, even plants that are not exactly part of their original diet, like the invasive species. But they're also known to eat plenty of insects whenever available. And they do need to find a lot of food to keep their bodies going. At least up to 2 pounds of food every day just to keep themselves going. And somewhat like the camel, when there's not much water around, they can go for a while without drinking. But when they do find water, they're the ultimate guzzling machine. They will drink and drink and drink. And honestly, it only makes sense because you never know when your next meal or your next drink of water is going to come from. But now, there's an interesting thing I'd like to point out today. So sometimes you might find a little group of stones, right? And maybe nearby, this might be a little gross, you might have found a dead bird, right? Well, in the emu's case, they actually swallowed those stones originally. So some birds are known to actually swallow stones as a way of helping digest certain food, because for a number of animals, some don't always chew their food, they just swallow it whole. And so as a result, you can imagine it's kind of hard to fully digest and get your gut going, right? So the stones that they've swallowed help grind up that food inside and making it pass and the methane gas as well as their food down their system more efficiently. So while the body digests, while the stomach digests, the body is free to continue on to look for food. Finally, let's end today's episode with their influence in human culture. Now, of course, the emu, hey buddy, how you doing? They are well known in Aboriginal mythology and art. So here's a wild example. The creation myth of the Yuwalare, as well as other groups in New South Wales, say that the sun was originally made by throwing an emu's egg up into the sky. And they've also been told in archaeological stories. They're even featured on Australia's coat of arms next to the kangaroo, and even more awesome enough, they're even featured on the Australians' 50-cent coin as a form of currency. So while the farmers do see emus sometimes as pests, these guys do have a bit of a great place in Australian culture. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time I have for today's episode, so be sure to join me next week for part 2 of the emu, and be sure to check out part 2 of the red kangaroo. Until next week, though, this is Safari Mack. I'll see you all out there.